Hello everyone, Dr. Mad here. Let's get mad about English language. So in this video, we are going to look at paper 2, Writers' Viewpoints and Perspectives, and it's 1 hour 45 minutes. And this time there are two sources, source A and source B, as opposed to paper 1 where there was only one source. And you cannot use a dictionary. It's 80 marks, 40 marks each for section A and section B. And again, section A is the reading and analysis section. Section B is the writing section, but this time viewpoint writing. And it gives you some advice here about reading through first and planning your answer to question 5. But we'll go through that in a bit more detail later on. Okay, so before we look at question 1, let's just look at the extracts. So again, paper 2, writers, viewpoints and perspectives. And this time we have two sources. And remember, you don't get much information, so you need to make the most of what you do get. So source A in this case is a 20th century literary nonfiction called Morning Glass, an extract from Mike Doyle's autobiography, okay, published in 1993. So fairly modern, and you get what type of writing it is. So just gives you a few clues to set your mind to understanding these extracts. And source B is a 19th century nonfiction, and it's called the Hawaiian Archipelago. So this means a group of islands, and it's an extract from a letter this time, written by Isabella Bird, published in 1875. So yes, one extract will be old, one will be fairly new, but they'll both be non-fiction. We're not going to read through the extracts, but again, you need to make the most of the small amount of information they give you. So it says here, source A is taken from Morning Glass, the autobiography of professional surfer Mike Doyle. In this extract, he describes his introduction to the world of surfing at the beach near his home in California in the 1950s. So this is really important information, okay? These are extracts that you will never have seen before. So you go into that exam blind, you need to take on board all the information that you can. And you've got these line numbers, same as in paper 1, which are very important. I'm not going to read through it, but just pointing out the sort of things that you need to take on board. And notice again, the extracts tend to go over one page, which I think is fairly deliberate. It makes it just a little bit harder than if it was just on one page. And then source B, in 1875, the British explorer Isabella Bird traveled to Hawaii, an island in the Pacific Ocean. Source B is an extract from a letter she wrote to her sister back in England, describing a visit to the Hawaiian town of Hilo. At that time in Britain, surfing or surf bathing was a completely unknown sport. Okay, so again, we're not going to read through it. Now, remember, you can't use a dictionary, and they don't usually give you a glossary, but occasionally they will give you one or two words. So do make the most of that. So in this case, they've told you that breaker or stroke coma, terms used by surfers for a large wave that breaks into white foam. And in the extract, you will see this star here. Okay. So again, please do make the most of the small amount of information that they give you. And just to go back to the beginning, you see morning glass, that doesn't really tell you anything, does it? It's a very confusing title. But when you find out that it's about surfing, then you start to think, actually, hopefully it might give you a clue that maybe it's to do with the water. Okay. And similarly, Hawaii, maybe you probably know, but this word archipelago, straight away, it's a word that you might not know. Okay. But when you find out, when you read the contextual information and you read about the fact that it's on an island and it's about surfing, then it might give you a clue as to what this word means. Okay. Okay, let's go back to the paper now. So, section A, reading. Answer all questions in this section. You are advised to spend about 45 minutes on this section. So, generally speaking, I would say spend about 10 minutes reading through both extracts and all the questions, 10 to 15 minutes, okay? And then question 1, read again the first part of source A from lines 1 to 13. So, this is really important, okay? So, lines 1 to 13 of source A. So from lines 1 to 13, okay? Um, sorry. So be careful. It could be source A, it could be source B, and it could be any number of lines. So it's really important that you look at the right lines. Choose 4 statements below which are true. Shade the circles in the boxes of the ones that you think are true. Choose a maximum of 4 statements. If you make an error, cross out the whole box. If you change your mind and require a statement that has been crossed out, then draw a circle around the box. Now, here's a tiny bit of advice. To avoid all this complication, what I would say is, so first of all, it's 4 marks. First of all, I would just kind of do the answers on the side, maybe with pencil if you have it, and only when you're sure of the answers, then you can shade this in. It will save you a bit of kind of panicking, okay? And the way to do it is, so the good news is that these are in order, okay? So this information will be in the same order as the extract, as the information here. So you will have read through everything already once. When you come to the question, I would read all these statements again. And what you should do is just maybe tick the ones that you are definitely sure of, cross out the ones that you are definitely sure are not right, okay? And again, usually, just like paper 1, about 3 of them will be fairly straightforward, but one might be a little bit tricky, okay? So do that, and then when you're ready, then you can shade these in. Now that sounds more complicated than it should be. With practice, that should become quite automatically. But remember, it's only 4 marks. You must not spend more than a few minutes on this question. 5 minutes. If you can get through it quicker and save a few precious minutes, then by all means. Remember, for the language papers, timing is absolutely critical. Okay, so that's question 1. Now, question 2 is what we can call the short compare question. You need to refer to source A and source B for this question. Both sources describe the types of board used for surfing. Use details from both sources to write a summary of what you understand about the different boards used by the surfers. 8 marks, so only 10 minutes on this question. So again, the format of the questions will always be the same, just the focus will change. So here, the focus is types of board, okay? So it's a summary of what you understand about the different boards, all right? So that phrase, different board, gives you the clue that they are looking for differences. Now, one other word of warning, this word summary is a bit misleading. Summary normally means just a quick kind of bullet points. It's usually considered to be a kind of like a low level skill. But unfortunately here, I mean, if you do that, yes, you'll get maybe a few marks, 3 or 4 marks. But to get the full marks, they're actually looking for more than a summary in the sense that not that you have to write a lot, you only have to write 2 or 3 points here again, but they are looking for deep, insightful comments in terms of how you compare. All right. So just be a bit careful that this word summary doesn't mislead you. Okay. But remember, it's only 8 marks. So just spend 10 minutes on this question. And then, so remember, they give you all this extra space just in case you make a mistake and you have to start again, but you don't need to use all that space. Just 2 or 3 points, 2 or 3 paragraphs. In terms of how you actually compare, there are different ways of comparing. That's going to be a different video. This video is just to give you an overview of how to approach these papers. Now, question 3. You now need to refer only to source B from lines 18 to 25. So notice here, this time is source B, lines 18 to 25. So you have to go all the way to source B, lines 18 to 25. So it's this paragraph here. You can put square brackets around it and do whatever you need to do. And the question is, how does the writer use language to describe the surface and the sea? 12 marks. So again, the format will always be the same, but the focus will be different. And in this case, it's about describing the surface and the sea. Now, this question is very similar to question 2 in paper 1, but in paper 1, they actually give you some clues about what language actually means, okay? Now here they don't do that. So you have to remember that language means essentially words and phrases talking about their effects and connotations, thoughts and feelings and images, alternative meanings of a word. So it's 12 marks, okay? So it's a bit more than 8 marks. You can't afford to kind of miss this question out or anything like that. We'll talk about the order of the questions in a minute, but for 12 marks, you do need at least about 3 points at least, maybe 4, but 3 good points would be more than enough. Okay, let's move on to question 4. So again, you don't need to use all that space. Now, this question is what we can call the long compare. For this question, you need to refer to the whole of source A together with the whole of source B. Compare how the writers convey their different perspectives on surfing. In your answer, you could compare their different perspectives on surfing, compare the methods the writers use to convey their perspectives, and support your response with references to both texts. So this is 16 marks. So notice in paper 2, the marks go up more evenly. It's 4, 8, 12, 16, as opposed to paper 1, where it's 4, 8, 8, 20. So in paper 1, the 20-mark question 4, is really, really critical. Here it is as well, but here it's more like question 3 and 4 are both fairly high marks. But you certainly need to get to question 4 and 5 and also question 3 as well. So again, the format is always the same with just slight differences. So firstly, it says here different perspectives. So that's your clue that they're looking for differences, all right? So if it says similarities, you look for similarities. If it says differences or different or similar, if it says different, you look for differences. If it says similar, you look for similarities. If it just says compare by itself, then you need to do both, okay? The word compare, quite often people think it just means similarities, but technically the word compare by itself means both. And the focus this time is on surfing, all right? And this word may be slightly different, but essentially it means the same thing. You might get perspectives, attitudes, viewpoints. Remember, the paper is about perspectives, isn't it? Let's just go back to the top. The paper itself is called Viewpoints and Perspectives. Okay. So let's just go back to question 4. Okay, so it says you could. Well, not really could. You have to. That's what you have to do. Now, what does methods mean? Very simple. Language and structure. But you can focus on language, and as you go through the text, you'll be automatically doing structure anyway. If you're aiming for the highest grades, then yes, you need to be more clear on what is the difference between language and structure. That's going to be a separate video. But to get a decent grade, 4, 5, 6, actually you can just focus on language. And here it says here you could support your response with references to both texts. Well, no, you have to. Not you could, you have to. Now, we'll talk in more detail about these questions as we go through the course. But if you're struggling with this question, one easy way to start is simply to think about what we call binary opposites. Now, that sounds like a very fancy phrase, but binary simply means two. Okay, you may know this from computer science. So 0 and 1. Binary just means two. And opposites, well, that's fairly straightforward. So binary opposites is a very fancy phrase for simply meaning you might start with does writer A have a positive or negative attitude? And then similarly think about writer B. So is it positive or negative, happy or sad? That kind of thing. That's what we mean by binary opposites. Okay, a very, very simple thing actually. And your opening sentence could be that if you're struggling a little bit on how to start this question. So this is 16 marks, so you need about 4 points for this, 4 paragraphs, maybe 5, but I think 4 would be enough for the 16-mark question here. And just finally, convey just means to show. Okay. Okay, so that's question 4. And remember, you don't need to use all this space up. Okay. After 1 hour of the exam, you should be on section B, writing. You are advised to spend about 45 minutes on this section, write in full sentences. You are reminded of the need to plan your answer. You should leave enough time to check your work at the end. So yes, you can spend 5 or 10 minutes, but no more than 10 minutes, okay? 5 minutes should be enough, which can either be a mind map, a spider diagram, or it can be bullet points. And remember, as you're writing, if you think of something, you should quickly go back and update your plan just in case you forget. Okay, don't think, oh, I'll remember. You might not remember, so just quickly add it to your mind map so you don't forget. Now, they will give you a statement. All sports should be fun, fair, and open to everyone. These days, sport seems to be more about money, corruption, and winning at any cost. Write an article for a newspaper in which you explain your point of view on this statement. So the number of marks is the same as paper 1. It's 60% for content and 24 marks for content, 16 for grammar. Okay, so 60% for content and 40% for grammar. So for the writing section, your grammar is really, really important. I mean, you should really use good grammar all the time because it's not really something that you can switch off and on. And then it says you're advised to plan your answer to question 5 before you start to write. Okay. Now, this is really important, guys. This statement is not something you have to answer. This is not an essay. All right. Unlike in paper 1, this is not an essay. So this is, in this case, it's an article. It might be a speech. It might be a letter. It could be anything, actually. And the point of this statement is really just to give you a starting point. It's a bit like the picture or the title in paper 1. Remember there, we talked about how those are just starting points. They are there to help you, not to hinder you, not to stop you. So they just want to make sure that you don't turn up and just write something that you have memorized. All right. So as long as your article is to do with sport, it's kind of related to this statement, then that's fine. So basically, here you are being asked to write an article about sport. Okay. Now, in terms of whether it's an article or a speech or a letter, to be honest, most of your content can be like the same, really. Okay. Especially for grade 4, 5, 6. If you're aiming for the highest grades, then yes, you should really think carefully about the sort of writing they're asking you to do. So, for example, if it's an article, you might want to have a heading, but please don't sit there and spend 5, 10 minutes on thinking of a heading. Leave that to the end. If it's a letter, then you need dear so and so, and yours sincerely at the end. If it's a speech, then you might say something like my fellow students. So if you're aiming for the highest grade, then yes, you need to think about your header and your footer, but don't worry too much about that. Don't spend whole like 5, 10 minutes on that. And the final thing to say here is, notice here it's saying to explain. All right. So here you don't need to be too convincing or persuasive, but here if it does say persuade or convince, then you would need to be more persuasive. Okay. So the two key, so again, the format will always be the same. You'll get a statement that is your starting point. As long as your piece of writing is related to that statement, that's fine. It's not an essay. You don't have to, this is not a question to answer. And your other keywords are, is it an article, a letter, or a speech? And here, does it say explain, inform, or persuade? And depending on that, you will subtly change your approach. Although, again, grade 4, 5, or 6, you don't need to worry too much. But for the highest grades, then you would need to be a bit more exact. And then the final thing to say about this question, reminder, 40 marks, okay? It's half the marks for this paper. So you really must do this question, all right? And in terms of quantity, we talked about this for paper 1 as well. You're aiming for 2 to 3 pages, okay? So the bad news is anything less than 2 pages, you're going to struggle to get a good grade unless it's absolute pure quality. But the good news is you do not need to write more than 3 pages, and you should not write more than 3 pages. Obviously, the number of pages will depend on the size of your writing. If you have very small writing, 2 pages might be more than enough, but just as a rough rule, 2 to 3 pages. Okay, so the only final thing to say is to talk about the order of the questions, which I've discussed in the overview video as well. But just as a reminder, let's just go back to the beginning. So you can do question 1, that's fine. Don't spend too long on it. Now, question 2 is a short compare question. All right. So that's fine. And we'll talk in more detail about how to actually do these questions in other videos. And then my advice would be question 3. So you're changing skills here in your mind, which is a hard thing to do. But I would maybe, so changing to the language question from compare is a bit tricky. So maybe skip question 3 initially. Do question 4 because now it's the long compare. So it's the same thing as question 2, but you need to write double, all right? Because question 2 is just 8 marks. This is 16 marks. So you're in the same mindset of comparing. Then go back and do question 3, the language question, okay? And then you can do question 5. But whatever you do, make sure that you get to question 4 and 5, and especially question 5 is 40 whole marks. As I mentioned in the overview video, some teachers say, "Oh, work backwards, do question 5 first." That's fine if that works for you, by all means. But with creative writing and viewpoint writing, it takes some time for your mind, for your brain to generate ideas. And remember that the extracts are related to the question. So notice this: the extracts are about surfing, about sport. And this is about sport. So you can use the extracts for inspiration, for ideas. Obviously, not, you can't copy from them, but you can get ideas from them, get inspiration from them. And of course, they are also perfect examples of good writing. They won't necessarily be the same type. So obviously, here we had an autobiography and a letter, whereas you are being asked to write an article. But in general terms, the quality and how you write something that is non-fiction, you've got two great examples there for you to follow, okay, in the exam. And that's it. I hope you found that video useful. And if you did, please do subscribe and tell all your friends about it. And I will see you in the next video.